Have you ever wondered why some countries just seem to have it all, while others are caught in a cycle of poverty? It's honestly one of the biggest and most important questions in all of economics. And for decades, the best economic minds have been on a kind of detective mission to crack this very case. So today, we're going to follow that trail of clues and see where it leads.
So, where do you even begin with a question that huge? Well, economists don't just wander around looking for random clues. Instead, they build these really powerful tools called models. Think of them like a magnifying glass that helps us zero in on the key ingredients that make a country prosperous. And at the absolute heart of this whole investigation is this one question. It's not just about how much money a country has, but how productive it is. Why is it that a worker in one country can produce way more value in a single day than a worker somewhere else? That's the mystery we really need to solve. And just to give you a sense of the scale we're talking about, get this. On average, workers in the top 5 wealthiest countries are 6 times more productive than workers in the bottom 5. That's not a small difference. That is a massive chasm. So what in the world could explain a gap that big? Okay, so our investigation starts with what you might call the classic recipe for economic growth. It's called the Solo Swan model. You can think of this as the first cookbook economists opened up. It lays out the most basic, most obvious ingredients you'd think a country needs to get rich. So this first recipe is built on a really simple idea. A country's total output, everything it makes and does, comes from 2 main inputs. First, you have physical capital. So that's all the factories, machines, computers, and roads. And second, you have your labor force, the people doing the work. Seems pretty logical, right? More stuff and more workers should mean more wealth. But here's where we hit our first major plot twist. When economists actually crunched the numbers and tested this recipe with real-world data, they found something pretty shocking. These 2 basic ingredients, tools and workers, could only explain about 1/3 of the wealth gap between rich and poor countries. That means a huge chunk of the story, more than half of it, is just missing. And this graph shows the puzzle perfectly. You can see that even if we try to, tweak the recipe and pretend that physical capital is way more important than it probably is, the model just doesn't work. It still falls short. No matter how you slice it, you just can't explain that massive wealth gap with these 2 ingredients alone. Something really big is still missing from our recipe. So, what is this big missing ingredient? Well, the detectives, the economists, started looking at a new suspect. Maybe, they thought, it's not just about the number of workers you have, but about how skilled they are. And that brings us to a crucial new idea for our recipe, something called human capital. So what exactly is human capital? Well, it's pretty much everything that makes a workforce smarter, healthier, and more productive. It's the knowledge you get from years of schooling. It's the specific skills you learn on the job, and it's even the basic health that allows you to show up and work effectively. It's the combined brainpower and ability of a nation's people. With this new idea, economists went back and updated their original recipe. They basically said, okay, we need to add a whole new line for human capital, right next to physical capital and labor. The theory now is that a country's output doesn't just depend on its tools and its people, but on how skilled and knowledgeable those people are. The recipe is getting a lot more sophisticated. And would you look at the difference this makes? Once you stop just counting how many years people sit in a classroom and you start factoring in the quality of that education, things like how good the teachers are, the model's success just skyrockets. All of a sudden, we can explain way more of the real-world income gap. We are getting so much closer to solving this thing. But we're still not quite there. Because you can have the best machines in the world and the most educated workforce, but you still need something else. And this brings us to the final and maybe the most important layer of our whole investigation. This is what you might call the secret sauce. This quote from the economists Hall and Jones just nails it. They call this secret sauce social infrastructure. And it's not about physical things like roads or bridges. It's about the rules of the game. It's about having a stable government, laws you can trust, and property rights. Basically, an environment where hard work and new ideas are rewarded, not corruption and theft. And this causal chain is the real breakthrough. You see, social infrastructure isn't just another ingredient you toss into the mix. It's the foundation. It's the thing that creates the environment where a country is even able to build up its machines and educate its people in the first place. Without it, all those other ingredients just don't work. A good way to think about it is like this intricate root system for a tree. Social infrastructure is that complex, interwoven web of laws, policies, stable institutions, and even just social trust that forms the bedrock of a productive economy. It's the soil that allows everything else to grow. So, have we cracked the case? Is that it? Well, mostly, yeah. But in the world of economics, the investigation never really truly ends. And a really compelling critique has popped up that pokes a small but pretty important hole in our theory, leaving us with one last lingering puzzle.
So here's the puzzle. Our whole model kind of treats getting an education like buying a product off a shelf. It has a certain price. But what if the biggest cost of going to school isn't the tuition, but the wages you could have been earning if you were working instead? If that's true, then the cost of education is directly tied to how rich a country already is. And that little thought has a massive implication. Think about it. As a country gets richer, wages go up. But that means the cost of getting an education, in terms of those lost wages, also goes way up. So a wealthy country can't just easily buy more education for its people if the very act of getting wealthy makes education more expensive. It creates this weird feedback loop that really complicates our neat and tidy solution. So we're left with this final, really challenging thought. Our investigation led us to a powerful conclusion that the real secret sauce for wealth is a country's social infrastructure, its institutions, and its laws. But that just leads us to an even deeper and maybe harder question. If we have the recipe, if we know what works, why is it so incredibly difficult for so many countries to bake the cake? That, I think, is the next great mystery to solve.